Good evening, and welcome to the weird and the wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. And yeah, we are starting again a new and interesting culture and a country. Something to talk about, at least, I hope. Something interesting and something different. And of course, we like to bounce around the world, keep things different every time. And our last live, we did Taiwan, which is an Asian country, but for tonight we are in Europe. And for our live tonight, we are going to look at Germany. Now, Germany is a very old country with a great many interesting things, and indeed a great many very well preserved castles as well. So I think that by and large, we should find something of interest there, despite all. So I hope that you are all ready and are suitably wrapped up warm for another evening of the mysterious and the spine chilling. So let's see what we can do. Alrighty, so if you are ready for this, let's see what we can say. So, Germany. Germany is, as I say, an old country, and there are quite a lot of places, in fact, that are said to be suitably haunted. So I think it will be a good trip around. I am going to remind you all of the housekeeping, so to speak. On this channel, we allow agreement or disagreement. You can think what we say is properly real, or you can think that it is truly rubbish. If you feel so moved, we don't mind. All we ask is that you bring a great deal of likes, comments, and more. Subscribe, why not? Because you can. But we do have one rule, and that is at least be polite, because if you are not going to be polite, we will give you the boot. Hi there to Music Lover, welcome, welcome. I hope that you are all in fine and fabulous form this evening. Much thanks for the likes there. I do appreciate greatly. I see we have one or two regulars that have joined us again as well. Glad to have you on board. So, Germany, an old country indeed. What can we say about it? Known for some very beautiful architecture, in fact, some stunning buildings. Back in the day, and even up until today, there are some pretty damn impressive forests, rivers, and more, but it does indeed have some beaches as well. It has its capital in Berlin. It has a great deal of art and nightlife. Of course, it's had its wars and things over the centuries, which should provide a reasonable amount of possible things to talk about. A very modern country in some ways, but juxtaposed with some very, very old places, known, of course, for the Oktoberfest, and very deservedly, I think. So, an interesting and fascinating uh, country. One third of the country, despite the fact that it is as modern as it is, are in fact covered by forests and woodlands. There are over 2,100 castles, and we know castles are a great place if you are looking for hauntings. Um, so there we go. That is what we have to say to situate ourselves. But what about what we are interested in? Well, as you can imagine, with that many castles, we absolutely have that many hauntings in the castles. But of course, we also have plenty to go around in the forests, in hospitals and military sites, and more. Mysterious ghosts, mysterious creatures, and tragic events for the curious and the brave. So let's see what we can do, and we are going to start ourselves off um, looking for the haunted locations therein. And the first and possibly most famous one is the Reichstag building in Berlin, the courthouse. My ability to translate from German is pretty sucky, but there we go. Um, and it's at the political center in that way, and it's supposedly haunted by numerous ghosts of famous politicians. So I think that will be a good one to check out right there. We have, of course, the Hexenturm in Heidelberg, the Witch's Tower, um, which promises much interesting things in that regard. So I think we shall absolutely get something out of there. Of course, you cannot speak of the supernatural or paranormal in Germany without mentioning the very, very real Castle Frankenstein. Yes, it is a real place, and it's not just from the book. Um, so we will absolutely have to be looking at what we can find therein. There's a large number of different castles, which I think we cannot deny is interesting, but we also have a number of abbeys, holy grounds. Much thanks for the likes there. You are a great person, and I thank you greatly. Um, and to Hamza Kachala, huge thanks for the rose. Always appreciate that. Um, very much so. So we have ghosts on holy ground. Um, however, how good a ghost was she? Because in Würzburg, in the Premonstratenser Abbey, there is the ghost of Maria Renata von Mossau, accused of mixing herbs into people's food to bewitch them. She was accused with sufficient fear, at least, that she was executed within 3 days of her sentence. She was first decapitated, then burned, and then her ashes scattered. And these days there are reports of her walking through the hallways holding a bouquet of roses, picking off petals one by one, and leaving a trail behind her. Oh, I do like that. I mean, come on, if you're going to be a ghost, do it with style. So, absolutely, I like this very much. In Wolfsburg, in Bavaria, there is the Wolfegg Castle, a 14th century castle that was supposed to be a sanctuary for travelers. The folklore of this haunting originates from the 1500s when Ulrich von Laber hired two young farmers to kill his wife, Clara von Halfenstein, after discovering she was having an affair. Shortly thereafter, however, Ulfrich and his sons died suddenly. There have been reports of strange noises from a cave near the castle. Several expeditions uncovered numerous animal skeletons, leading locals to decide that the noises had come from hunters hiding their prey. But this isn't certain, and indeed, there is a white lady who still restlessly wanders around the castle. So I think that will give us reasonable fodder to talk about. Don't know. What do you guys think? Are you ready for this? We also have, of course, the most famous of the German forests, which absolutely is supposed to be haunted. And that is the place that the Romans back in the day called Silva Nigra, and which to this day is known as the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest. And it has an almost fairy tale persona to it by day. World famous for its cuckoo clocks and numerous spas, as well as monasteries, castles, and ruins. Also, of course, the setting for many of the tales of the Brothers Grimm. So we know exactly what kind of stories to expect from that. And if anybody knows anything about the original fairy tales, you know very, very well indeed that they were never meant for children. Legend holds that it is haunted by werewolves, witches, and possibly even the devil. In the tale of Der Grossemann, it's the story of a tall and horribly disfigured man with bulging eyes and too many arms, and bad children who entered the forest were made to confess their sins to him, and if he deemed you bad enough, you were never found again. Consider, for example, one of the original Grimm stories, The Goose Girl, which is a story of a princess on her way to meet a prince in a faraway kingdom, but the maid accompanying her had ill intentions and forced the young princess to trade places with her. The maid took her magical steed, a talking horse named Falada, and when they arrive at the castle, the false princess had Falada killed to hide her misdeed, and forced the real princess to work the goose girl. The skull of Falada is hung over the city's gate, earning the attention of the king. She tells her story, that is, the magical horse does, and he punishes the false princess by rolling her around the city in a spiked barrel until she died. So there you go, good fairy tales from our dear friends the Brothers Grimm, but really and truly not something to tell the kiddies. Now, outside the city of Osnabrück is the Eisenbahnstraße, and on this street is the site of a sacred pagan temple and graveyard. The site, however, and this shows how old the site was, um, was desecrated by the troops of Charlemagne. The pagan priests were massacred as Charlemagne spread the good word of the Christian faith. They broke the largest altar stone to prove the supremacy of the Christian God. But to this day, visitors have said they have heard the screams of those slain, and you see inexplicable bloodstains on the rocks. So, yeah, maybe you shouldn't mess with um, burial sites or slaughter priests. It seems to be bad for you. On the Klosterhof in Weißebrunn in Germany, you may find the Weißebrunn monastery, the site also of one of the earliest written German poetic works, and it's been in the monastery library for centuries, though more recently it did in fact move to the Bavarian State Library. What is less known is the accompanying nunnery next to this monastery. A sister supposedly broke her vows in the 12th century and hid herself away in an underground passage to escape punishment, but it seemed that it did not go correctly, and she died of starvation down there. And never at peace, she now wanders the halls crying. So, right there, that sounds like the most suitable sort of story we can expect. And I've got to say, when it comes to these stories, we know that in the Taiwanese legends we had last night, they're very much about love and betrayal on all of these stories. However, in Germany, it seems they go in for horror. And I think that's a rather fun sort of thing. The next interesting place is the Konn Barracks in Schweinfurt. Once used by the Nazis as a hospital, mental ward, and mess hall, since then the site was occupied by US soldiers from 1945 up until 2014. But it seems that the Nazis never really left. So, hey there, Jake. Welcome, welcome. Now, as we progress with this particular one, we see it is military, military, military all the way along. Different American soldiers. So, what's interesting is that it's not the locals, but rather people who are there that are not Germans. They have reported waking up to find a Nazi soldier standing over their bed with a blood-covered nurse. The two were spotted whispering in German together about their patient. The experience is unlikely to be repeated, however, as in 2014 the base was returned to the German government. But can you imagine waking up in the middle of the night to find the dead talking about you and your medical requirements? I dare say that's more than enough to give you pause and scare you witless. Welcome, welcome to all of you who have just joined us. We are talking about the supernatural in Germany tonight. Now, the Babenhausen Barracks. Babenhausen Kaserne has been the home to soldiers, both German and American, over time. Nowadays, it is a museum, and we all know about museums, of course, because we know for absolute certainty that ghosts can attach to objects, and museums are places where objects are gathered. So it seems that they are moving up on our list of places likely to be haunted. So somewhere that's had soldiers and was involved in a war and now is a museum seems to combine a great number of different possible reasons for having ghosts. Now, World War II ghosts are said to frequent this area. Classic signs of the paranormal, like lights inexplicably turning on and off, marching footsteps, and voices are heard from the basement. The town also has an older legend to contend with, as it is here that a witch was burnt at the stake in the 19th century. She was blamed for seducing and murdering German soldiers. So it seems that we have multiple sources of possible ghosts. But of course, what ghost story can we even have without proper monsters? Many thanks for the like there for the G Cabis. Welcome, welcome, and much thanks. Always appreciated. Now, Berg Frankenstein. Now, we know for absolute fact that the greatest of the horror stories that really inspired horror in the modern way include things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, set in Romania. But another such one which really started the genre in a way that mattered was, of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But not many people realize that Castle Frankenstein really does exist, and it is a place in Germany. Now, just for clarification, um, a lot of people think that Frankenstein was the monster, but no, he was not. The monster did not have a name. Frankenstein was the doctor. Uh, in real life, however, the castle was built in 948 BC, so it is well over 2,000 years old, and it has been inhabited by various Frankensteins over the years. But by the 1600s, the Frankenstein family had died out, the last of which was in a very strange manner. The last heir was killed in a chariot accident on his way to visit his one true love, Anne-Marie, and she is left waiting for him only to die of a broken heart. Now she wanders the castle looking for her lost love, and perhaps he wanders elsewhere, trying to reconnect even in the afterlife. More pertinent to Frankenstein was the next resident of the castle, Konrad Dippler von Frankenstein. He really was a monster. So there you are. That he wasn't made at midnight with lightning, alas, but he was an alchemist, a scientist, and a grave robber, reportedly experimenting with bodies to reanimate the dead, just as in the story. Um, the differences to the story, however, was that he did not succeed, alas. Well, reportedly did not succeed. Um, and indeed, the townspeople stormed the castle to get at him, but could not break through its barricades. It was, after all, a castle. But he drank one of his own concoctions and died in his laboratory. They say that some of the things he made um, did escape, unlikely, or maybe not, and lives in the nearby woods to this day. But the ghost of Conrad haunts the rooms, still active in his odd experiments. Now, it seems that this is something that quite a lot of people do believe. So, well, maybe there's some truth. Perhaps we'll have to visit Germany and find out. The next interesting place is Bernkastel, and more importantly, its cemetery. And if you go to Veerlen on the Bernkastel Kies, you will find this cemetery. And therein, you will find both the Kriegsgrabe, the German war graves, and a Jewish section. And within there, roaming between, is a white lady, a crying woman in white that roams between the graves. It is said that if you go there on All Saints' Day, um, you can go and light a candle on the little tombs. And if you do, there is a good chance to actually see her as well, which might be quite interesting. Women in white are a common theme in many countries and cultures, which is quite interesting, um, as many of the cultures have nothing to do with each other, but nevertheless, a woman in white will appear. The next interesting place is Reichenstein Castle, which is on the Bergweg along Trechtingshausen in Germany. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the castle there is quite literally the kind of castle you would expect from a proper fairy tale, with all sorts of ghosts and more in it. Dark stone walls, narrow windows, and battlements, and yes, a creepy backstory. So, back in the 11th century, they built it to protect the nearby village, which now, of course, is the city of Aachen. The castle underwent the usual cycles of siege, destruction, and rebuilding, and among the many stages, King Rudolf the First of Habsburg captured the castle in 1282. It has been controlled over the years by robber barons led by Dietrich von Hohenfels, whose cruel rule crushed the local peasantry. King Rudolf wanted to destroy this group, and he ordered the castle not to be rebuilt and the robber baron executed. Dietrich von Hohenfels begged the king to spare his 9 sons, and the king offered an impossible bargain. If von Hohenfels' headless corpse could walk past his sons to a line in the sand, each son he walked past would be set free. Of course, an impossible thing to do, you might say, unless, of course, they did it. The executioner struck off his head, and amazingly, his body made it past his sons and across the drawn line, to the horror of all. But alas, 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 the king did not keep his word and swiftly executed the sons. All 10 bodies were buried in St. Clement Chapel. Van Hohenfeld's descendants used the chapel to pray for forgiveness, but apparently it did not work, and to this day, von Hohenfeld's soul and his headless ghost roam the castle. So, yeah. Now, of course, while the Germans are known to be amazing drivers, nobody's perfect. And of course, you can't have hauntings in any place without a good haunted road. So there is, of course, Bundesstraße 215, which is in Drakenberg, Germany. It is a road where strange things are known to happen. Supposedly, it has more accidents than any other road in Germany. There is a white lady to be found here, and there are all sorts of stories of ghostly activity by people that drive the road. And indeed, a number of the accidents are said to be caused by the very same ghosts. The next interesting place we are going to talk about is, in fact, a ship. Hey there, Essie. The ghost ship of Emden. The SMS Emden was completed in 1909 and sailed all over the oceans before it was sunk just off Germany's northern coast. It was returning from a long journey, and loved ones gathered at the harbour to welcome their sailors home. But the harbour master refused entrance due to a personal grudge, and rough waters battered the ship until it sank within view of land. And now, under a full moon, the ship and all of its passengers drowned and disappeared beneath the ocean. So, locals and visitors have said that if you are there on the docks of the harbour at full moon, you can still see the ship out there. Now, of course, when it comes to stories, we know many of them, but we know them as stories and nothing more. But perhaps there is something more, because the wonderful story of the Pied Piper is based, they say, not only on the stories of the Brothers Grimm, but perhaps it's based on truth. Now, what kind of truth can we find? Well, recorded by the Brothers Grimm as the Rattenfänger von Hamelin. Basically, during the Middle Ages, the town was being decimated by the plague. Now, in the story, it was a plague of rats, but this is not actually accurate at all. The rats themselves, nobody really gave two hoots about. The problem was this was during the Black Death, and as we know, it was transmitted by rats, which is the important part. So it was not the rats themselves that people worried about, but rather the fact that they carried the plague. So they hired a pipe player to lure the town's rats away. The piper, of course, as we know from the story, was greatly successful, but the townspeople refused to pay. And so, seeking revenge, the piper lured the children, but not to the Big Rock Candy Mountain as in the stories we've all heard. No, no. He lured them into the ocean to die. There is, however, more to the story because Hameln in Germany is real. And while there are no historical records of murderous pipers, it does have a very dark set of backstories to it that certainly do seem to link to the basis of the stories, what was plagues and death and more. So, who is to say what happened and how? But the story is remembered, and you can go and watch it be reenacted by actors on Sundays in the summer on the River Weser in Lower Saxony. The Kranzberg Castle, another fascinating place indeed, in Usingen. Schloss Kranzberg, Castle Kranzberg. It has been many things over the years, but its short history was that it was a headquarters for both Hitler and the Luftwaffe in World War II, and that alone has given it a suitably negative vibe. Known as Alderhorst, the extensive bunker was added, which linked between the rest of the complex and the castle. And after the war and the tables turned, it was used, in fact, as a prison for Nazi war criminals. It seems that war has a way of making things worse no matter what. And I remember a statement somebody made to me that said, "Remember, in war there are no winners." True enough, in this place, people have reported a great many strange occurrences, including ghosts that, in some cases, have been said to be quite angry and even violent from back in the day during the war. So, maybe we shall have to visit one day and find out what we think. But the ghost stories definitely do all fit to what they say we may expect in a war-torn and war-used set of castles and places. The tragedy and the death and the horror therein. Let us talk for a moment about the Nachtkrab. The origins of the Nachtkrab legends are still unknown. They say that it may connect back to infestations of rooks in Central Europe. Rooks are a kind of blackbird, already feared due to their black feathers and their scavenging diet. Mass gatherings quickly became an existential threat to farmers and gave rooks and crows their place in folklore as all-devouring monsters. Several versions of the Nachtkrab exist, but generally it is referred to as a giant nocturnal raven-like bird. The most popular and hideous of the legends claims that the Nachtkrab leaves its hiding place at night to hunt. If it's seen by small children, it will abduct them. It then flies to its nest, whereby it grossly devours the children, ripping off their limbs and then pecking out their hearts. In other legends, they only get abducted, and placing them in his bag. How he would hold a bag, we're not sure, but they are taken away, which sounds like a watered down version of the original legend, so as not to be too scary. There is the Wutende Nachtkrab, the angry night raven, which, despite the name, seems to be tamer than the other version. Instead of abducting children, it simply crows loudly until the children have been suitably terrorized. There is the Gute Nachtkrab, the goodnight raven, and this scary creature is a good version. It enters children's room at night and gently sings them to sleep. I'm not sure if that's better in any manner or form, or if that's perhaps a lot worse. But as we move along with strange things in Germany, we're going to throw in the Aufhocker. Aufhocker literally means to lean upon. It is a creature that is said to jump on the back or soldiers of lone wanderers at night, instilling such horror in their victims that they collapse in fright. Some myths state that the individual collapses not from fright, but because once it's attached itself to your back, it grows dramatically in size and weight until you collapse from exhaustion and thereafter die. There is an Aufhocker statue in Hildesheim in Germany, depicted in a human shape, but the actual form in the original stories seems to be quite unclear. And many actually describe it as a shapeshifter that appears as a dog or a sad old lady. And this may link to a similar creature said to exist in Belgium known as the Klude, which is remarkably similar to the Aufhocker. However, some descriptions also say that it is a type of zombie or ghoul, or possibly some kind of a dwarf or werewolf. It's not really sure. It seems that the general upshot is that it is a dangerous theriomorph or shapeshifter that ultimately likes to kill its victims, ripping out their throats. So, nice. However, problem. The Aufhocker cannot be killed, but it is said that it might be driven off by prayer, church bells, dawn, or, and perhaps we would manage to sort this one out very quickly, and maybe that's why we don't get them in this country, profuse swearing. Yeah, I'm pretty certain that if swearing gets rid of one, it wouldn't stand a chance in South Africa. We're good at that. Now, the next interesting place we are going to talk about is the Barensquell Brewery of East Berlin. Now, the fall of the Berlin Wall impacted Germany in a major way, and indeed the world in so many different ways. It also, however, changed very specifically one of our favorite things for the world, beer. It was generally said, at least, and probably not by those on the east side, that the west side made far, far better beer. Um, but the construction of this factory happened in 1882, um, and it is a very large brewery. 1882 was the official beginning of it, and over the next 40 years or so, 10 more buildings were added on to the premises around the official residence, including administrative blocks and more. Um, and the administrative block was built in the Neo-Renaissance style in 1888. 3 years later, the bottle-bearing building was added to the whole setup in Gothic revival style. And after that, a neo-Gothic wing was added as well in 1902. So over the years, it just kept getting bigger and bigger with very, very different architecture in every building that happened, as it were, which is quite interesting. And over the years, um, even though it got quite severely damaged and more, um, it kept on going until eventually in 2009 it stopped brewing. Uh, it rented its buildings for a little while, but eventually all of it became abandoned and it was closed to the public. And the only people that went were urban explorers and graffiti artists, and where young people snuck out to, ironically, drink beer. But as of 2014, they are looking at the revival thereof. But as things go along, you can imagine that there are a lot of stories. And with this, they say that there are many, many ghosts in the building. So, first of all, you've got the ghosts, disembodied voices late at night, uh, things moving, things sounding like things being thrown or dropped, banging and clanging. Um, and then some of the kids that tried to hang out there reported shadow people and apparitions and more. And, well, yes, creature type shadows, which we all know what those are and what to expect of them. So it seems that there is a lot more in this place than is actually realized. Now, Berlin's Citadel, an interesting sort of a place, um, because of it is the site not of gruesome horror as we have come to expect, but of a tragic love story. Um, Joachim II, a local ruler about 6 centuries ago, had an ex-lover, Anna Sido. She was a temporary prisoner who was kept locked in the castle, and as he was dying, the ruler gave his last wish um, to his son to take care of Anna. But the son was a cold-hearted bastard, and he did not keep his father's wish at all and kept her a prisoner and kept her there right up, in fact, until she died. Now, the problem thereon is that Her ghost still roams the halls, trying to leave the castle, um, yet never managing to, no matter what. Uh, so now the next place is what is now in the Czech Republic, but originally it was part of Germany, and it is Zwickov Castle. Um, and it is one of the creepiest places, in fact, because if you ever wanted to see a proper vampire castle, this is what it should look like. Very, very creepy and dark, but nevertheless with that awful, eerie elegance. Um, and it is said, of course, that at the end of the 16th century, the castle became haunted by a supernatural entity. Locals say bizarre happenings take place in the castle, strange voices, strange things going wrong, lights flickering on and off, animals behaving very, very badly or oddly in or around the castle. And when people take photographs, sometimes there are things in them that should not or were not there. Um, Candles can spontaneously catch alight. Fires suddenly roar up when they should not. And they say that if you sleep a night in the main tower, you will probably die within a year of doing so. So, what is in there? What might be? We don't know, but it might be worth a visit. Hey there, Balkan and Essie. Good to have you on our live. I hope that you are enjoying. Welcome to everyone else. Remember, like, share, subscribe, join, and do all the good stuff for us. Send lots of hearts and gifts and more, because we very much want to keep this live going. And I think it is one that has become somewhat popular. The next story we are going to talk about it's one that we know all about. We have in many of the countries we have spoken of, many of the cultures we have spoken of, encountered a white lady. And weirdly enough, they all fit the same kind of general pattern. And it seems that um, it's no different in Freihung. The White Lady story is just the sort that you would expect. A woman whose spirit is said to haunt Freihung, that died an unnatural death when she was still quite young. She used to pass down through the old mining tunnels and scare the residents, but uh, eventually the residents became scared enough of her that they destroyed the tunnels. However, that didn't stop her, and this spooky white lady still wanders around scaring people. But here is an interesting little addition, something which perhaps uh, explains many urban legends, because the place you are most likely to see her is not in the streets um, or as an apparition as such, but in a mirror. And these days, she has found that she can also appear in the rear view mirror of cars. And you might find yourself driving through Freihung and you suddenly see a passenger in the back seat. But if you look around, there's nobody there. So who's to say? maybe she has a point to make. I don't know. Now, Berlin, ground zero for quite a lot of stories and indeed quite a lot of ghosts and quite a lot of history, let's be fair. Berlin has cemeteries, hidden tunnels, bunkers, old buildings, and of course, with all of that, ghosts, which is exactly what we expect in every manner and form. Now, Belitz Heilstatten, a very old and incredibly ornate building, gorgeous. Very sad that it is abandoned and damaged in the way that it is. It would have been a wonderful thing, um, indeed, if it could be that it was restored, because it is truly a wonderful thing. The Belitz Heilstatten, ironically, is the healing center. An eventful history dating back to 1890. It started out as a tuberculosis clinic. Thereafter, in World War I and II, it was used as a military hospital for wounded soldiers. Um, Sad to say, though, um, hospitals, as much as our great places of healing, are also often, particularly in wartime, uh, places where many die. And it seems that this is indeed the case, as we know that back in the day when tuberculosis hospitals were built, by and large, they were not built for those likely to survive. They were built as the last places for those who were going to die. Medicine was not advanced enough to manage tuberculosis by and large. So, as you can imagine, lots died there. And, well, World War One and Two, as you can imagine for that, lots of deaths. And if you still go there, you can visit. It is a 200-hectare building complex. But if you go there, you will be unsupervised uh, in the rather endless, dilapidated corridors and rundown treatment rooms. Um, but you will not be walking around it alone, because they say that you can hear the cries of former patients, uh, the soft moans of injured soldiers, and the racking coughs of those dying from tuberculosis. And they say that sometimes the shadows on the walls don't have people making them. Now, the next bit is, I'm sorry to say that I love ghosts. I do. I am not afraid of ghosts, neither. But if there is one kind of ghosts that really do freak me out, it's children ghosts. And this next one is a place that you are more than welcome to go on your own. The Kinderkrankenhaus, or Children's Hospital in Weißensee, very, very eerie. Opened in 1911. And in this time, infant mortality was truly terrible. Um, and it served as a children's hospital apparently right up to 1997. It's now forbidden to enter the grounds of the building itself, but they say that you can still hear children playing and sometimes crying within the halls of this hospital. And as you can imagine, it is a very, very freaky place that you don't really want to visit. Now, there is a monastery in Mitte, and if you go down the Klosterstrasse, you will find the crumbling ruins of a Gothic Franciscan monastery. And legend has it, one of its 14th century inhabitants was named Father Rodericht, a young nobleman that had a rather sordid affair with a beautiful young lady. When the liaison was discovered, he was chased away, suffering a broken leg and permanent injury. Broken hearted and now with a limp, he entered the monastery here, and his character changed. He became foul and angry, and it even in it reached a point where he tried to incite his brothers to murder. So, nice guy by this time. So much for being a priest. One day, a young man appeared at the monastery with whom Roderick got into an argument, and he locked him in the cellar. When he learned a little bit later on, however, that the stranger was his own son, he ran down to free him, but the boy was already dead. Roderick then collapsed crying, but was killed by an angry mob incensed by his cruel ways, and his angry and tragic ghost is said to haunt the church there to this day. Not one you can feel terribly sorry for, it's true, but there you go. The next place is the ghost castle of Tegel, a building with white towers at its corner. The towers loom over Tegel Forest and have done since 1558, and for almost as long as that, the stories of a poltergeist. According to legend, things kicked off at the end of the 17th century when the owners of the castle started to notice some mysterious happenings. Whips could be heard being cracked outside, glowing stones flung at the inhabitants, fires catching for no reason at all in the hallways, and eventually the spirit took shape, a dark, billowing mist or a shadowy figure, dependent on its fancy. After a long reign of terror, the ghost seems to have disappeared for a very long time, just as suddenly as it appeared. But recently, its figure has now been seen again outside the gates of the castle. What is it? Why is it there? And is it back? The Zuidwestkirchhof in Stahnsdorf, Brandenburg. Southwest Cemetery. It covers more than 200 hectares, making it the 10th largest cemetery in the world. Well, if you're gonna have a big cemetery, let it be biggest. Countless graves, tombs, and crypts in very many various states of decay, some of them so overgrown and ramshackle that you can barely read anything on them. The cemetery, interestingly though, has only existed since 1909, which historically speaking is not that long at all. But besides being very, very haunted with all kinds of stories about lights and ghosts and apparitions and noises and whispers and more, what makes this one particularly creepy is that many have said the stone statues turn to watch you as you pass through some of the areas. So who knows what is in there and whether or not it's friendly. Now, the next interesting spot is a combination of things. I mean, the suicide cemetery in the forest, a tale of real hauntings. The Selbstmorderfriedhof, suicide cemetery in Grunewald Forest. There is a lot of history to it. It is in a clearing in the Grunewald Forest. It's apparently not very big. It is quite near to the Havel River. And the river makes a bend there. And it seems that a great many suicides who have drowned themselves in the Havel River float to shore in this particular bend. And people founded the cemetery there in 1878 because suicides were considered to have committed a mortal sin, and therefore, of course, they could not be buried on holy ground. So the church refused to bury them. But in order to deal with the bodies, the forest administration established this small cemetery. And because you couldn't bury a suicide in holy ground, people that committed suicide anywhere else also started getting buried there. So it seems that it became so famous that some purposefully planned and executed their demise near the cemetery. And indeed, the unredeemed and unconsecrated souls of those now dead become restless in the cemetery. And reports of noises, shadows that scurry between the graves are told. And in fact, there was a local resident who visited there in 2010, which is pretty recent, that claimed to have seen a dark figure rising like smoke from the river itself and moving over into the graveyard. Well, unblessed and unable to go on. The next interesting place is the Breiselang Forest, which is a small municipality in Brandenburg. And since the 1980s, these are the stories. Now, this is interesting yet again because, as somebody pointed out to me, why is it all ghosts are ancient? What happened to modern ghosts? Are there none anymore? And of course there are. So this story started only in the 1980s. Eerie tales woven through the forest, and with it, the stories of the Breiselang lights, strange lights seen among the trees in the dark of night. These floating lights spooked the first discoverer, but thereafter more and more accounts started arising. White, red, or green lights flickering through the trees at night, and some claiming to hear voices and sounds. Now, so the story goes, there was a young girl murdered in the forest in 1945 by Soviet soldiers, and legend has it her spirit is still haunting the forest. Or possibly that of her father trying to search for her carrying a now ghostly lantern. Now, perhaps this gives us a little bit of an answer as to why most ghosts, at least, appear to be quite old. And the answer seems to be that a ghost does not necessarily form immediately. It may take a certain amount of time for it to be able to manifest. And perhaps, as a friend of mine joked the other day, it is eminently possible that in 50 years we will have hauntings of K-pop ghosts. Who's to say? Nevertheless, a claim which in many ways I think needs to be verified is that every single forest around Berlin is haunted. Now, here's the thing. At night, if you live in a city, let's be fair, there will in fact be plenty of lights around. But one thing I can tell you, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this fact, when you're really out in a forest or in a wild area, when it gets dark, it gets really dark. And that alone is enough to make a forest suitably creepy. So perhaps, maybe, we don't know. That is why the forests around Berlin are said to be haunted. On the other hand, it was ground zero in World War One and Two, and there were indeed a great many deaths that occurred there. And of course, Berlin is a very, very, very old city with a great deal to be said about the place. So, given that some of the forests are big enough to have wild boars and more in them, why not ghosts as well? I shall leave it up to you. I don't know. What do you think? Give us a comment. Give us a story. Has anyone been to Germany and gone ghost hunting? Does anyone know anything like this? Hmm, 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 hmm. Well, let's talk about Schloss Kopernik. If you go and visit this sort of castle, yeah, it's not the full-on Dracula style or the medieval English style. It's a fortified house um, with a few extras to very much keep people out. It does indeed have a moat, and it is beautiful. It really, really is. It's a lovely, lovely castle, but that's on the outside. And in good German fashion, we have grisly stories underneath. And this is a love story, but grisly, because after all, Schadenfreude, you know? So, according to the stories, this is how it went and what happened. So you may make of it as you will. And we shall see what we can say about that. But yeah, correcting my line up there. During, not entirely sure way back when, they don't give too many dates in the research for this, a nobleman, no, a noble woman, so it was the woman who was the upper class one, fell in love with a common man. And of course, not allowed. You work within class or not at all. And when her liaison was discovered, they were cruelly punished. He was dragged out, beaten, and hung from the bridge pier for his falling in love. But do not think she got away with it. She was walled in alive in the dungeon. So basically, you're put into a very, very small, narrow space where you can barely move, often standing up so you cannot ever sit, and then bricked up and left to starve to death. So, not a nice way to go. And since then, both their souls wander through the castle, and people have claimed to have heard them, seen them, and on occasion seen a veil fluttering near the bridge. But apart from the unhappy lovers, there is a number of other ghosts as well, including one which I've been waiting to encounter, because we've only come across it in one other of our places thus far, and that was in North America, USA. And this is a large black dog with glowing red eyes that appears suddenly in the dark in the castle grounds. Now, animals rarely turn up as ghosts, that we know. But nevertheless, when they do, they are particularly nasty. And this one is no different. A huge black glowing eyed dog. And as you can imagine, you don't want to meet it. But the next interesting place that we are going to talk about is the Messedam Tunnel. Now, it's ugly, in my opinion. It was built with the very bright 70s design, which includes huge amounts of orange. And even during the day, this subway tunnel is not the nicest. Uh, but at night, it gets a lot worse. And indeed, they say this is the sort of place that's eerie enough just as it is. And your imagination can go wild. Um, the escalators really work, and it seems to be often not full of a lot of people, especially at night. But reports say there are times when, as you walk through, you hear footsteps behind you and nobody there. That you might hear the sound of trains coming, but one doesn't when you think it will. So, there are still trains running through, however, so sometimes it's just fine. It's just on other times where the ghosts also need a ride. Ballhaus Grunau. In the early 1990s, this amazing grand ballroom was closed. It is an Art Nouveau building that really must have been amazing when it opened in 1875. But since the 1990s, it is very much dilapidated, and nobody is allowed in anymore as it is starting to fall apart. But they say that late at night you can still hear the music playing and the sound of dancers partying away inside the building, even though it is completely empty and locked up. I don't know if that's sweet or tragic, but either way. Now, of course, as we know, Germany has a huge amount of stories and more. And in a country that really, really had a genuine Dr. Frankenstein in the genuine Frankenstein castle, let's be honest. What more can you ask for? And yes, you can visit Castle Frankenstein even today. And in fact, it is suitably creepy that I think it worth even showing you an old picture of the castle, because why not? It's properly creepy, and we like that. But more can be said about it in terms that having had within it the kind of stories that it did, as you can imagine, it was suitably dark. There you go. Right there, a suitably gothic horror setting for a very real place, which is delightful if you enjoy the horrors. Um, and it was constructed in 1250 by Lord Conrad II Reitz of Brauberg, and he was the first to adopt the name von und zu Frankenstein. And from there, the legend. And of course, the doctor himself only was born much, much later. And in fact, one of the things he was most famous for was something that was even used in World War II, much after him, because he was around in 1673, and that was something known as Dippel's oil, made from pulverized animal bones. A dark, viscous oil was used as a chemical warfare agent that rendered wells undrinkable without actually making the water poisonous. How it made them undrinkable, I'm not sure, but if it was used for as long as that and lasted as long as that, it must have been something fairly awful, if nothing else. Um, and the sort of mind that comes up with a way to kill people has got to be um, slightly off, if nothing else. Um, I don't know what else to say. Brothers Grimm, of course, bring us a great many stories, and for those of you who are unaware, the Brothers Grimm did not write any stories. They did not make any of them up. They wrote them down. Basically, what they were a pair of folklorists and linguists, and their aim was to collect and preserve stories told by local people. And they collected their stories under the title of Kinder- und Hausmärchen, um, children's and house stories. And this really started the idea of studying folklore. And it's an amazing collection in a great many ways. Uh, and they've remained popular such that it's arguable they are the greatest collection of folk and fairy tales in the world. They were, in fact, both born near Frankfurt in 1780s, the brothers Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. They were the oldest of six, and they compiled also other collections, including folk music and stuff as well, um, and did important work in linguistics and philology, which is very, very important. But they are remembered for their fairy tales, and there were seven editions in total. The first editions being far more gory, and as they have gone on, they have become nicer and sweeter and arguably better for general consumption, but nevertheless, um, the original ones are the best, which perhaps we should not go too far down there on. Now, we've probably all heard um, of the more famous places, um, and certainly the famous men, but Berg Elf and the warrior princess Agnes. So this is a medieval castle tucked away in the hills of West Germany between Koblenz and Trier. And it's one of the more famous castles and has never been destroyed or taken in battle. It has been owned since its construction by the same family, and it is really a stunning castle set atop a hill in very misty valleys. Um, The castle is said to be haunted by the ghost of Agnes, daughter of a 15th century earl from the Elth family, and her hand was promised in marriage to the Squire of Braunsberg when they were both children. Years passed, and as the two became adults, their engagement day drew close, and the families arranged for them to finally meet for the first time days before the engagement was to formally take place. Upon meeting the young squire, Agnes was shocked at how rude and callous he was, and she begged her father to reconsider and call off the engagement, but he refused. The marriage had been agreed upon years ago and had to be honored. Negotiations concerning dowry and heritage began between the two families, and at the final meeting, when everything had been agreed upon, the squire turned to kiss his soon to be bride, but Agnes refused to kiss him, and he responded angrily, swearing at her. Tensions rose, as you can imagine, and the squire's family was expelled from the castle. The Braunsberg squire raised his forces and laid siege. The Ilse guards were tricked into leaving the castle, chasing an expeditionary source, allowing the squire to sneak in with his heavily armored bodyguard one night, and they began massacring the Ilse residents, servants, and the remaining guards. Agnes woke to the sound of murder, and seeing the slaughter from the window of her tower, yes, she was a real princess in a real tower, rushed not away, but to the castle armory. She took her brother's ornate breastplate and sword and rushed into battle, furiously hacking back the attackers. Her courage rallied the remaining defenders, and they turned the tide of the battle. The attackers seemed all but beaten, and then an arrow pierced Agnes' armor, fatally wounding her. Seeing her fall, the Elsa defenders rushed the squire, hacking him down and driving off the attackers. The castle was saved, but Agnes succumbed to her wounds, and her spirit forever is cursed to haunt the castle she sought to defend. The next interesting story that we have for you is Lorelei. Now, Lorelei is on the Rhine River. That is where her ghost appears. Or is it a ghost? No, not exactly. Some say a ghost, some say not, that she is in fact a nymph or spirit. Either way, she is a woman in white, surprise, surprise, but she has a wreath of stars in her hair. Not only was her physical beauty astounding, but her song so haunting and hypnotizing that no sailor on the Rhine could resist her aura. Enticed by her song, legend has it that no sailor that heard it and tried to reach her ever returned. Instead, they would meet their final fate, crashing against the dangerous rocks and dying. Today, a statue of Lorelei watches over that very dangerous stretch of water near St. Galshausen. But nevertheless, a woman in white, or perhaps a siren type spirit, but she definitely kills the sailors. And if you're wondering, just by the way and way the by, the Rhine River is freaking huge, and it is absolutely used greatly by a lot of quite large ships. You can sail up it pretty far. So, a major important river for a lot of reasons. Now, we are saving, of course, this one for when we have touched on enough of the scary. And that, of course, is Krampus. Now, we all know Santa Claus and all the good that old Saint Nick does. But in Germany, he has a counterpart uh, who is, of course, not quite as nice. And during the celebration of St. Nicholas Day on December the 6th, a great many people to this day dress up as Krampus, roaming the streets to frighten children and adults alike. Um, and while St. Nick brings presents, Krampus punishes the wicked. There are, of course, even till today, lots of uh, parties celebrating him, but Krampus absolutely um, comes from a darker part, a punishment in ragged, furry clothing and with a sack upon his shoulder to drag you off and possibly eat you, given by the size of the fangs he's said to have. But yes, a suitable set of terrifying ghosts, nevertheless. Uh, Haunted castles, there are millions. We cannot even begin to touch on all of them. But as we say, there are a number of good ones. Burg Nanstein in Landstuhl uh, is quite a popular one with a very bloody history. Franz von Sickingen, a notable 15th century knight, was crushed to death under a pile of rubble after unsuccessfully picking a fight with the Archbishop of Trier. Uh, Berg Beilstein, which is south of Kaiserslautern, uh, makes for a wonderful place to hike up to near the castle, and there you will find Berg Bevarstein. Uh, Sorry, I mixed my notes ever so slightly there. I do apologize hugely. Berg Beilstein is the one with a 12th century ghost girl and her ghost companion who thwarted a pair of forest bandits. Berg Bevarstein is a little further south on the Kaiserslautern, the French-German border, and there is apparently a castle belonging to a legendary robber baron, um, and the castle ghost uh, that wanders around can frighten the guests that stay there. Stuttgart itself, and while the most terrifying thing about Stuttgart is the traffic, um, nevertheless, there are ghosts too. Uh, and the old castle, the collegiate church, the market hall, and more has headless horsemen and bad monks and more. So there's plenty to talk about in the different places. What I find most interesting is, again, we have the tale of the headless horseman, which very much matches much of what the story in America. So perhaps there are links. Who is to say? Um, Make of it as you will. Now, what kind of ghosts do you get uh, in the sort of German view of things? Now, there are a couple, in fact, um, and a couple of weird cryptids in uh, many stories which perhaps can give us something to add to what we um, apparently may know. Um, oops, getting my notes to work and they are being difficult. Now, as we begin, we are going to start with the poltergeist. Now, this is a name that, of course, fits to a lot of things that we understand in that regard because it's become the word used around the world for exactly this. Poltergeist literally means a noisy spirit, the kind of ghost that is responsible for physical disturbances and noises. So, any ghost that makes loud noises, moves objects, or breaks things. Um, they say that a poltergeist can even bite or hit people and are quite dangerous. They can cause the levitation of things, knock on doors, and create foul smells, spontaneous fires, and electrical issues. So that's one that's affected a great deal of ghostly history in that regard. Now, what's very interesting in this particular line of thinking is another kind of some call them spirits, some say they are ghosts, some say they are a mix of both, and they turn up in a number of different cultures, which makes them very interesting. And I refer, of course, to the wild hunt. And certainly the Germans have a wild hunt. Wild hunts typically involve a chase, usually led by a mythological figure, escorted by a ghostly or supernatural group of hunters uh, engaged in pursuit. Now, in Germany, they say it is often Odin that leads the wild hunt, though in other versions, Theodoric the Great might be the one, or possibly even the dragon slayer Sigurd. Um, Other places such as Wales and uh, the Celtic areas and more have different stories. Seeing the wild hunt is thought to forebode catastrophe such as war, plague, or at least the death of the one that witnessed it. Uh, some say that they will abduct you either to the underworld, as in the German version, or possibly to the fairy kingdom. Uh, and some are forced to join um, the wild hunt as well and possibly never return. Um, it's certainly spoken of in um, some of the legends recorded by Jacob Grimm in his Deutsches Mythologie. Um, but it is quite possible um, that he didn't actually invent it per se. So a wild hunt that hunts along, and what exactly uh, is it supposed to do? Not clear, um, really and truly. Uh, it hunts anything worth hunting by and large. If you are out at night. So, yeah, you get that. But it's a theme we are going to pick up in a number of European places as well. Now, the next interesting thing is the Bieressel. Here's a kind of ghost or cryptid that I can get behind. It's a beer donkey, if you translate it. Um, and it's a kind of house spirit in German folklore, or a kobold. It's mentioned in the stories published in 1705 by Johann Georg Schmidt, um, where it's described as a kobold or devil taking the shape of a donkey and drinking beer at night. Uh, it was also used as an insult as far back as 1597. So, what exactly it is unclear, but in Ruchla in Thuringia, a Beeresel with the appearance of a three-legged donkey would roam the streets looking for beer drinkers and reputedly practices Aufwalken, which we spoke of at the beginning of the live, jumping on a person's back and forcing them to carry the spirit until eventually they collapse, possibly even dying. Um, they are said then particularly to choose people who got drunk at the pub, and then it punishes them that way. Um, in Vogtland, if a child laughs too loudly, people will say that he laughs like a beeresel. Um, and there, the beeresel does no particular harm, but is a loud drinker in many ways. So, in Großwitz, near Torgau in Saxony, uh, the beeresel brings beer inside the house like a drac and does other household chores. So, is quite a nice and helpful spirit, but expects a glass of beer every evening in reward. And if it doesn't get it, it will break everything. In Grima in Saxony, they have stories about a similar creature, but not too much is explained on what it's meant to be. But at the end of the day, um, I rather like the idea of a beer ghost, or at least a beer cryptid. It does strike me as being the sort of thing that appeals. But as we progress with our stories, um, we have a number of other um, interesting ones. Um, there is a woman known as Kunigunda von Orlamunda, who was born in 1303, the first child of Ulrich I, Landgrave of Lichtenberg. She was married, but they had no children, and they adopted a daughter. And eventually, as you can imagine, when her husband died, she was left with a vast inheritance, and she used to fund the convent of the Celestial Throne, a Cistercian monastery in Nuremberg. And later on, she entered the service as the abbess. She was the founder of the convent, although um, this is disputed. She certainly endowed it, if nothing else. But according to legend, she is known as the White Lady of Hohenzollern. Um, apparently, she is said, at least, to have fallen in love with Albrecht the Fair, and he proclaimed he would marry her if four eyes did not stand in the way, meaning his parents, um, who would not approve of the match. Um, and Kunigunda apparently mistook his message and thought the eyes referred to her children, which in truth she never actually had, making this a story. So she stabbed her children's eyes out with a needle and killed them. Albrecht, horrified by the actions, refused to marry her. So uh, she made a penance pilgrimage to the Vatican to gain absolution for her actions, and the Pope made her enter the monastery. So she stayed there in what is essential uh, imprisonment, and now her ghost um, haunts the castles there. But given that she was actually childless, though the story is a gruesome and interesting and fun one, alas, it shows that some ghosts don't actually exist. Zaps, you are a star, and I thank you for the kindness of that. Um, I'm very glad to receive that gift. But as we move along again, another rather interesting one is a very modern ghost. And this is Chopper. Chopper was an alleged ghost living in a dentist's office in the city of New Traubling in Regensburg. Um, but they say it was actually a fraud. True? Not true? Arguable. Uh, Apparently, in 1981, he started appearing in phone calls made by the dentist. He would spew insults with a distorted voice. Um, and the only person he was nice to was the then 16-year-old dental assistant, Claudia. At some point, the dentist called the police to try and find out who was terrorizing him during phone calls. And uh, the German Bundespost replaced the entire wiring system and installed technical traps to try to find the source of the voices. Um, and even certain radio broadcasts, but this proved unsuccessful. And voices started to come from sinks, toilets, and sockets within the dentist office, despite spending over 60,000 Deutschmarks to uncover the source, and nobody could figure it out. And eventually, uh, they even founded a criminal unit specially to deal with these things, um, called the Sokogeist. But nevertheless, nothing could be found. And eventually, it spread around the world, even, and covered by newspapers, visited by ghost hunters and more, and mediums, and all the rest. But they never could actually find where it came from at all. Um, so who is to say? According to one legend, in fact, it was a fraud that was done to um, create excitement, bring people in. Um, who's to say? Um, but they were blamed, and it was said that it was their fault. But the dentist and his wife seems went mad, nevertheless, and were admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Um, Claudia herself was fired, retreated from the public, and never went back into known service, but assumed a new identity. So maybe it was a ghost, and maybe it was all rubbish. Who's to say? The next interesting one is um, related to the wild hunt, and that's the eeuwige jager, the eternal hunter, the one that leads the wild hunt, perhaps. Um, but who exactly or what exactly he is unclear. He says in the legends that he is once a lord and a human, but according to the story, um, he loved hunting so much he begged God to let him hunt eternally until Judgment Day, and uh, God granted the wish, um, and eventually he met up with Count Eberhard of Wartenberg, according to the stories, and the Count demanded that he show his faith, but it seems that he had become, in his armor or clothing, so old and shrunken that his face was like a turnip, withered and barely as big as a fist. Um, they say that he still hunts and will do until his wish is fulfilled. But it's a fun story, um, but I think not true. But we won't admit to that, will we? Now, a story that is said to be true is the Rosenheim poltergeist, um, which, of course, took in Rosenheim in southern Bavaria. Uh, and it was claimed to exist by the German parapsychologist Hans Bender in the 1960s. Um, there was a number of electrical and physical disturbances in the office of a lawyer, Sigmund Adam, caused, according to Bender, not by a ghost, but by the telekinetic powers of a 19-year-old secretary. There are a lot of criticisms about this, as you can imagine. Um, and according to the stories, lighting fixtures exploded, swung back on forth, heavy office furniture shifted, and more. Um, a large number of outgoing calls to a goofy correct time service were said to have happened as well, which the staff claim never to have made. Um, and this is the first instance, and the reason I bring this story up. Um, and it's because there are those who say that a poltergeist is exactly that, a ghost. Uh, but there has been a number of stories or claims, if you will, that say, in fact, poltergeist activity does not come from ghosts at all, but rather it comes from the unstable teenage mind of unhappy teenagers that manifest through telekinetic effects, either knowingly or unknowingly. Now, how true that is hard to say. I imagine there are plenty of people who say either way it's a load of rubbish. Again, hard to say, but Bender's investigation technique was not very scientific at all, and therefore, it seems that there's not enough that was done to see whether it really was a ghost, or if in fact the young lady was able to do any such things at all. At the end of the day, it raises the question of whether a ghost is a ghost, or if in fact it is the result of the living. I suppose that's a fair question. The next kind of ghost, particularly, it seems to me at least to be a bit of a weird one. It's halfway between a ghost and a poltergeist, and it's called the Vuurman, literally a fireman, a humanoid, often a human skeleton that is on fire. Some say it's just on fire. Others say that the outside of the mannequin or person is not on fire, but the fire is inside the creature. Another description says it's a man in a strange sort of suit, but his insides are on fire. And his height, of course, varies and dependent on the story. Long, scrawny legs, often a missing head, and in some cases a hollow back. In some cases, the Vuurman appears as a black shadow with fiery eyes, carrying a lantern or smoking a pipe. But it turns up in a number of stories, and where it goes, it can set things on fire and cause a various amount of trouble. Now, what is it? They say that it is a sinner that has died, that is forced to remain on earth because of its sins. Criminals being punished in that regard, suicide victims, murderers, especially if multiple murderers, and more. And they appear only at night, often in fields and meadows, and it's considered to be an omen of an impending firestorm. There are versions in other places as well, which may or may matter, but they can be helpful when they want to. Not all of them are actually bad, but if you are not good to it, as you can imagine, it does not go well. So a different kind of ghost as well. And then you have the Turst. And again, he is a huntsman. But this one comes out in um, wild storms, accompanied by a baying pack of hellhounds or dogs. Um, most known um, are his threats, where he says in a loud and angry voice, "Step right or get out of my way," where the careless pedestrian who does not is turned into a member of the dog pack. Um, Stories go on, and it is said that one of his issues that he does is he causes dairy cows to become sick. It's a farming version of um, the hunter, and the way to deal with it is to put up crosses around, um, basically to use holiness to ward off evil. Just another story because we can. There are various others, of course. Um, the Herman, a, a spirit that goes around frightening people at night. Um, Sometimes it does the Aufhocken thing as well, jumping on your back. Um, some say it is a ghost, others say it is a spirit. It's unclear. But nevertheless, they have them, and it's pretty cool in that regard. But as we go along, we notice that there are a few other interesting creatures as well. The Elvetrich. Elvetrich. It's not the easiest thing to actually comment. A bird creature that's spoken of and said to be a kind of weird chicken, flightless with a long beak, sometimes with deer antlers. And it seems essentially to be the German version of the American jackalope, if you will. A weird creature that is said to wanders around and may link back possibly to very, very early stories from biblical origin with the and pre-biblical origin with the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and the Assyrians through the Lilitu, or possibly uh, Lamashtu. But the stories have somehow stuck around, and um, you have this weird creature that may or may not chase after children. Make of it as you will. Weirdness abounds. Um, you also do have the Wolpertinger, which absolutely is a jackalope, a bunny with wings and horns. Um, what are they meant to do? Well, they are found in the forests of Bavaria. Um, they only show themselves to pretty girls on a full moon. If they are taken into secluded parts of the Bavarian forest by the right man. Uh, mm, let us say it's dodgy right from the start. Um, what are they meant to do? Well, nobody's really sure. They are a thing that exists, and that's about it. Um, to be honest, it's just weird. But hey, that's what we're here for, is it not? The weird and the wonderful. Uh, so make of it as you will. By and large, I think it is fair to say that um, there are plenty of strange things, like, of course, the Bakalv, a monster found around Aachen, a deformed cow with long fangs. It's said to mostly attack drunk men in the forests. Uh, the city of Aachen has many thermal springs found all around it, so absolutely it seems that the ideal place, of course, um, as drinking beer is a hobby many men partake in, and this is a creature that seems to hang out in wild places, especially in bodies of water. So there you go. Um, what exactly it does? Well, it chases down the men and harasses them and jumps on their shoulders, um, eventually, possibly, ripping out his throat and killing him. So, yeah, we have some weird. Would it be fair to say that the stories exist by and large? Yeah, a slight disconnect there, but we're back. Always a good thing. But as we progress, we are going to round off our stories because there are many. There is absolutely a severe limit to how many we can even begin to talk about. So I think it's fair to say that the the German cryptids are suitably weird, and the ghosts fit exactly to the kind of stories that we expect of ghosts. Um, weirdly enough, there are not stories of Bigfoot creatures that I have encountered. So it's an odd one. Why would there not be? Because certainly that's the kind of um, thing I would expect to exist within um, somewhere as forested and such as that. The closest I have come to is a all-female type forest being called a Shrat, which apparently, if you're a woman going into this Schweizerwald, you're fine. If you're a man, it will probably kick you um, to death. It is a large and nasty creature. So there is that. It is hairy, it is big, but apparently, at least, it is not um, really a Bigfoot at all. So strange. The fact that there are a lot of stories about the shadow creatures that can shapeshift and more seems to imply at least that the idea of the jinn uh, is not surprising at all, and very much may exist within Germany. The ghosts, of course, fit exactly to what we expect, and I'm not surprised about that at all. Um, so, nothing new learned on the ghost side, but it has certainly been a fascinating and rather wonderful um, journey in absolutely, I'm going to say that um, it barely touches on the sheer amount of things that are out there that we ought to be aware of and can learn from. And it's truly been an interesting delving in. Um, Certainly, if anyone has any more that you might be interested in hearing about, I would love to hear it. So do let me know um, if you have any things you wish to know about within topic, of course. But I think we have gone as far as we can tonight. Remember that we get together every night except on a Sunday at 10 o'clock South African time. That's GMT plus 2. Um, and you are welcome to join us. Um, I will be doing that uh, unless something happens and I am unable to. But until then, I think it is late enough and cold enough that we have chilled ourselves enough and are ready to head to bedward. So remember, like, share, subscribe, join in and be a part of our little group. We would love to have you take part in the subscription as well, but until such times, I'm going to bid you good night. Sleep well, sleep deep, but sleep with one eye open, and perhaps keep a holy object near at hand, just in case, because, my friends, sometimes those things that go bump in the night might very possibly go bump for you.